There was no doubt about it at all, at all. The cow in the stall wasn't Norman's cow. It might have looked like his cow. It might have been the same breed, had the same markings. You or I would have thought, Norman, that's your cow. But Norman knew it wasn't his beloved Ailey. For his dear cow gave the creamiest, frothiest milk in all of the Isle of Skye. And this thing gave vile, blue, pussy stuff that was fit for neither man nor beast. And Ailey, his cow, he would speak to her and she would moo and wiggle her ear in soft response. He talked to this thing and nothing in return. This was a serious thing for Norman. He was known locally as Tourmid Crupach, or Limping Norman. For whilst he'd been fit and strong in his younger years, in recent years an illness had come upon him. His ankles, his knees and his hips had become swollen and sore. It was hard for him to work. It was hard for him to walk. He had to get the neighbours to come and help him bring in the harvest. Once or twice, he'd even had the shame and embarrassment of getting them to come and help milk his cow. But without her, he had nothing. She was food, she was companionship. So he thought about what he could do. And being this sort of time and this sort of story, he thought there's only one thing to do. I must go and visit the wise woman. So he made his way slowly and painfully down the glen. A few wisps of cloud floating through the clear blue sky. He could see the shimmering sea in the distance, the mountains of the mainland too. But eventually he came to a small thatched roof cottage. Knocked on the door. "Ah, it's yourself, Norman. Come in, come in." And he was beckoned in. He sat by the fire. He was given thick black tea with just a dot of cream on some oatcakes. And then after they'd caught up on the local news and the pleasantries, the woman narrowed her eyes and said, "Now, Norman, what really brings you here?" He said, "It's my cow. She's been taken. There's something else in her place." And the wise woman frowned a bit, stared out the window, then back at Norman, and after a while she said, "Norman, did you by any chance curse your cow?" "I would never dream of doing such a thing," he said. "She's more than a cow to me. She's my friend. She's my companion. I would never say a bad word against her." But the wise woman was having none of it. She said, "Now, Norman, think long, think hard. Did you maybe curse your cow without even meaning to?" And then he thought. And after thinking a while, he spoke and said, "Actually, now you mention it, it was just yesterday. And she'd given me such nice, creamy, frothy milk that I wanted to say thank you. So I reached down to get her a handful of hay, an extra handful of hay, and as I moved past her, she bumped my hip against the side of the stall, and it was that painful. I said, 'God damn it, Ailey, can you not stand still?' 'Ah, Norman, you cursed your cow. And through cursing your cow, you made a gift of her to the wee folk, to the Dina She, to the good people, to the fairies.' 'Well, what can I do?' he said. 'She's all I've got. Without her, I'm done for.' And the wise woman said, 'Norman, you know as well as I, there is no guarantee with the other crowd, with the fairies. But if you follow my words to the letter, you may just get your cow back. Whatever it is, I'll do it,' he said. And she gave him the instructions to go and get dressed in his finest clothes, to get a horseshoe nail, to get a mallet, to go out to the cow, the changeling cow, and find the dumb spot. The spot in its back just above the pelvis that they used to press if the cow doesn't give milk. Find that spot, take the nail, take the hammer, and whack, she said. And he wasn't too impressed with this suggestion, but what else could he do? He thanked the wise woman. He made his way home and thought, well, I'm a poor man. I don't have many fine clothes to wear. But he did have a linen shirt, woven by the hand of his mother, dyed golden with saffron, and he buttoned that up. He wrapped around a long length of tartan in the old Phelamore style. He tied it together with a belt made of bull hide, with a shining brass buckle. He pulled on some deerskin boots that were well made and barely worn. And in his finest clothes, he found the mallet, he found the nail, he went out to the byre, to the cowshed. And when he looked at that strange cow and thought about what he had to do, the hair stood up on the back of his neck. But he thought, no, for Ailey I will do it. He walked to the cow. He found the dumb spot, he took the nail, he took the mallet, and whack, and whoosh. He found himself floating up from the ground. He floated out of the byre, the cowshed. He floated down the valley. He could see the golden gorse in the hills, the shimmering sea in the distance. He floated towards one conical hill. And as he got closer to the hill, he saw an opening in the side of the hill. He floated right down that opening, down a long tunnel, and landed with a bump in a chamber. There were flickering torches in the wall, and as he looked around, this chamber was filled with wee folk. Little people no bigger than the height of his knee, but dressed in the old traditional style. And of these wee folk, an old man with a long grey beard and bushy eyebrows stepped forward, hobbled forward with his stick and looked up at Norman and said, "Norman, what brings you here?" "I've come for my cow." "Ah, Norman, you cursed your cow. Through cursing your cow, you made a gift of her to us. You can't just come and demand you take her back." He said, "Look, I'm a poor man. She's more than a cow to me. I love that cow. She's a friend. She's a companion." And he pleaded and begged to the fairies. And eventually, the fairy chief spoke back and said, "I tell you what, Norman, if you can prove you love your cow as much as you say you do, and you can give us gifts in return, then maybe you'll take her home. Whatever I can do, I'll do it." And so the fairy chief called forward the older fairy men and said, "What would you have from this man?" "It's a fine belt, made of strong bull hide. With our fairy magic, each one of us could have a belt as good as his, if not better." And Norman unbuckled his belt, handed it over. He called forward the younger fairy men. "It's a fine length of tartan, a fine length of plaid. With our magic, think of all the garments we could make." And Norman unwrapped his plaid. The older fairy women, they claimed his boots, and they inspected them, inspected the stitching and the handiwork, and thought of the fine things they could make. And finally, the younger fairy women were called forward. "What would you have from this man?" said the chief. "It's a fine shirt, woven with sky linen. With our fairy magic, we could make many fine garments." But at this request, Norman paused, for this was the last thing of any value that he owned, and the last thing given to him by his own mother. And seeing this hesitation, the fairy chief spoke and said, "Ah, Norman, you don't love your cow as much as you say you do. Gladly you shall have this too." And Norman unbuttoned his shirt. He handed it over, and the fairies were delighted. There was a murmur of excitement that filled the chamber, and eventually the fairy chief came forward and said, "Norman, you do love your cow, and you've given us good gifts in return, so you will take her home, but before you do, we have a gift to give to you." And he was quite chuffed with that. He didn't expect anything else in return, and he watched with curiosity as the fairy women, young and old, gathered up plants, nettles, witch hazel, other things he didn't recognize, and they formed them in bunches. And they took these bunches of herbs and plants to him, and they whipped him. And they whipped him, and they whipped him, and they whipped him around the ankles, the knees, and the hips. And it was that painful that he screamed. And as he screamed, he found himself lifting up again, out of that fairy cavern, out of the tunnel, out across the glen again, over the gorse-covered hill, and he landed in a meadow not too far from his home. But when he looked up, what did he see but a cow that was the likeness of his own? And he said, "Ailey, is that you?" And she mourned in soft response. So proudly he stood up. He took his cow by the horn. He made his way back to his croft. But as he was walking home, there were some neighbours in their own house, peering out the window, and they goes, "There's Norman with his cow, and he's naked." And it's true. He was as naked as the day he was born. but his legs were as strong and straight as they had ever been. So from that day, he was no longer known as Tourmid Crupach, limping Norman. He was known as Tourmid Lom, naked Norman. But once again, he had his cow back, and as far as I'm aware, he and his cow from that day lived long and happy lives.